What's going on, everybody? This is Mike, and this is RetroGameFix.com Serial at Night, episode number 50, I believe. It's been a while. Been a while since I've been on the mic, but I found myself with a little bit of time here because I was recently laid off, which is going to be a topic of conversation today. Yeah, before we get quite into that, and a couple other news items. Yeah, I was let go. It was kind of a pain in the ass, so I made a couple career moves, one of which I wasn't super thrilled with when I finally got into the new company, and then made another move that I thought was a pretty good play, and led one major M&A effort for digital acquisition. And as a company that was trying to migrate from legacy print software to digital first applications for really kind of the entire news media industry. A lot of the core, growth or attrition initiatives that we had were really on acquiring companies. And so I ran down the path of recommending, we take an M&A route for one of our key competitors. I did that. And they wanted to close the deal in about 8 weeks. It was funny because about 4 weeks in, after I'd already kind of handed over a lot of the, research as far as, how it would kind of fill gaps in our portfolio, what we would be looking at as far as a current customer migration, further gap analysis, revenue opportunity, so on and so forth. I started getting pulled from the meetings, and I was going, this is interesting. And, it's all speculation on my end because there was a larger reduction at play, but, I'm pretty sure that what ended up happening is I kind of, by doing my job well, ended up kind of signing my own death wish, because once that M&A closed, I was out the door along with reductions as a result of other major M&A, initiatives as well. So that kind of sucked. But, it is what it is. It's part, it's kind of part of the deal, right? And for me, I think the key is just remaining marketable, and I always kind of continue that job search, and not only from just, hey, I want to switch positions, but it's always a good idea to kind of keep your ear to the ground to see how marketable you are, and more importantly, just where those gaps are, right? I was at a company for 11 years, was able to grow that company in a lot of ways, and that's when I decided, hey, maybe it's time for a change. And throughout that 11 years, what really kind of gave me the ability to grow within my position and within the company that I was at was I always kept my resume updated, and I always kept an ear on the ground for the changing demands in the market. And this can really apply for anybody, but as you're seeing the market shift and you start to notice keywords and job titles and technologies and just different demands in the industry you work, or just in careers in general, those are items that you can start to look at and say, okay, maybe I need to start, investing in myself a little bit to get up to speed in some of these areas. And so that's something I've always done. And for employees that I've had that have reported to me directly, even other employees and hires that I've mentored, that's always been one thing that I've said. And it isn't bullshit when people say, and especially leaders say, keep your resume up to date. It isn't to always say, keep your resume up to date, you're going to get fired. I mean, it's a key piece to remaining marketable and having ownership in your career. And I would recommend going back to it at the very least once a quarter. Because usually every quarter there should be something of merit that you can add to a resume that's really going to kind of keep that thing moving forward and keep you competitive. And so, not to get on a soapbox there, but I think being a little bit candid in some of these areas is relevant to some of the conversation I'm going to have here today in relation to, the Activision layoffs. And so let's get into that, because this is the thing that irritates me the most about the games media and the games industry, right? Is we continue to see time and time again, and just a general lack of business acumen from the people covering the news. This can go, I mean, you don't even have to barely scratch the surface to see examples of this. Again, for example, the one of the big things that comes out every month is kind of the MPDs, or quarterly numbers on units sold for hardware. And every month you'll see Sony was the best-selling console in January, or Microsoft sold as ahead of pace by X percentage, or Switch was the best-selling console, with so many units sold. And what ends up happening is the industry latches on to units sold, and they start writing stories about it, and then the internet gets all argumentative over it, and everybody starts equating and conflating units sold to success, and so on and so forth, which it certainly can. I mean, that is a metric, that is a single metric that can be very beneficial in defining and measuring success. The problem is it's not the only metric, and that's where we run into problems, right? Is these industry experts, industry analysts, right? They often will just grab one single metric and use that to, try to tell a story, try to tell a narrative, maybe even try to support a narrative that they want to tell. But it doesn't actually really tell a story at all, other than this is how many units are sold. I mean, we're not looking at operating expenses. We're not looking at any kind of supply chain management. We're not looking at any marketing, advertising costs. There's just so many buzzwords I could probably throw in there. But the long story short, units sold without having a general idea of what the actual growth strategy was and the margins on each of those consoles doesn't tell us shit, other than the install base is going up, which could lead to more software sales and other things that do drive revenue, right? But even now, and I've been preaching this for as long as I can remember, is that all the information people want to talk about and want to analyze, right, is all available publicly, right? You can jump on some of the investor calls; those are sometimes publicly available. You can get the financial reports on a quarterly basis. You can get the annual financial reports, And in these reports, and some places will cover these, or some places will at least try to cover them, they'll jump in, and for the most part, once again, they'll grab a single metric or a single sentence, take it out of context, and try to speak for the success of said company. And again, it just doesn't work like that. If you want to analyze the quarterly report, or you want to analyze the annual report, read the report. Read it end to end. Then take a step back and analyze what the numbers are actually saying, right? And this came up again specifically yesterday with the layoffs at Activision. So Activision laid off quite a large sum of people. And yesterday also there was a investors call, and in that investors call, Activision president led with, and I'm not going to totally quote this because I didn't pull it up, but something along the lines of Activision reported record revenue. And, of course, combined with the layoffs, the internet lost their minds. Lost their minds because Activision said to their investors on the day of layoffs that they recorded record revenue. What everybody was leaving out of this conversation was they didn't talk about operational cost, expenditures, business units operating in the red, so on and so forth. People just wanted to look at one single metric of record revenue. revenue, not surplus, not profits, not P&L. I mean, fucking just looking at the profit and loss statements would go a lot longer way than just looking at revenue. But that said, there's not an issue with this message, right? Again, let me go back to my scenario. And I worked for a major company in a $200 billion industry. And there were layoffs. Approximately 15 to 20% of our U.S. staff was laid off due to M&A efforts that, deprecated pillars, so on and so forth. And there was an all-employee meeting the next day, along with a board meeting that I would have normally spoke at. And I guarantee the message. I know the message actually for a fact because I was in the meetings leading up to that, because obviously they don't want people to know who's getting laid off, so you can't take, company assets with you. The message was, we performed better than ever. Our attrition numbers were lower than expected. The M&A efforts provided a larger jolt of business than they actually thought was going to come in. They were able to move multiple legacy customers into digital-first platforms in the cloud that are ongoing revenue streams and really no-touch revenue streams. Great year for the company, but there are operating budgets that need to be met, and they set those, and they laid people off. It is business. Businesses make business decisions. You know what else businesses do? Businesses will lead, much like the media industry, businesses will lead board meetings, all-employee meetings, investor meetings with some sort of positive metric to start telling the story, right? And in Activision's case, that number was revenue. We had record revenue. They were then able to go on and tell a further story about the revenue, about the operating costs, about the margins, about the profit and loss, about the book of business, right? About all of these year-end reports that if you've done any kind of post-secondary schooling in business and financial management that you would know of. But nobody covers that. Instead, everybody gets outraged because people were laid off. And the first word that always comes up in the gaming industry is unionize. They need to unionize. Think about that just for a minute. There's no conversation yet about the real KPIs behind the fiscal discussion during the investor call. There was no narrative communicated within these gaming industry and the gaming sites about the other metrics provided in that phone call. All that was known was record revenue, layoffs equal unionize. That's a little reactive. Just a little reactive, right? And it's a sad state of affairs when I'm not going to make a case one way or the other right now. Unionizing could be a fine way for the games industry to go. It could be a bad, way for the games industry to go. I don't know yet because I haven't dug deep enough into what that business model really looks like to go. Does this make sense, right? But what doesn't work is taking revenue plus layoffs equals unionize. That is not how the dots connect. And it's always assumed that they're going to unionize, they're going to get paid more or paid steady, they're going to work less or more consistent, and they're going to have benefits and a variety of other advantages to unions, right? I'm not anti-union. But But there are disadvantages to it as well, right? It kind of levels the playing field a little bit, which some people would say are good and bad. There are, forced practices that go along with being in a union. I mean, there are disadvantages as well. The point being that all of those things need to get looked at before somebody just throws a fucking dart at the wall and says, revenues, layoffs, unionize. That just isn't how it works. It's not. The comments in some of the tweets I read were absolutely absurd. There was one comment that stood out to me that said, I'm scared. I just finished a degree in game development, and I could potentially become laid off because my boss wants more money. That's what this news industry, this is what this gaming media industry is convincing people. No, that isn't it either. It isn't, let me tackle this. So, it's such a dumb sentence. There's so many things to unpack. Getting a degree in game development doesn't mean you are qualified or are guaranteed a job anywhere, even though you've been convinced of that. B, having that degree isn't any indication that you're actually good at it. C, if you get a job in games development, there are numbers and expectations that business units need to meet so they at least start operating in the black or are part of a larger strategy that is profitable. So, the narrative actually is, if you are working for a publicly traded company and you are working for a business unit that is constantly operating in the red and you are not meeting numbers or part of a larger strategic initiative to build the brand, revenue, profit and loss, so on and so forth, blah, 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 yes, you could be at risk for losing your job. Welcome to corporate. This isn't... Companies are results oriented. I don't know how else to say that. Is it shitty? Yeah. It sucks. Like I said, I'm out of work going on 2 weeks here. I have leads. I also plan for the worst and do my best to drive businesses towards the best. But sometimes things happen. And the best approach people can have is keeping themselves marketable. Approaching themselves as a brand. I know that sounds, again, ridiculous. Being on brand. It is true. Continue to market yourself. Continue to improve yourself, right? And even then, there are no guarantees. And I guarantee there's people listening to this go, well, then unionize. Unionize so you don't have to remain marketable? Unionize so you don't have to continue to build your skill set? And I know that I'm not trying to paint with the broad brush here, but the narrative doesn't match up. There needs to be a better employee labor case for unionizing, and to date, I have not seen anybody make that case for the games industry. And I bet you that case could be made, but nobody, not a single leader in the games industry, none of these people who are complaining in the games industry, people of power in the games industry who actually have the power to make change. Instead of making change, those same people are doing like every other person, and they're going on Twitter and complaining. Best example of this was Devolver Digital, a game development studio. Simply put, unionize. You know what, Devolver Digital and the leaders at Devolver Digital that be, there is nobody stopping you from going down that path. You could be a leader in taking steps toward unionizing. But let me also remind people, there's another step places can take. You could just put best employee practices in place so this conversation doesn't need to come up again. But then people are going to ask, but what about the big companies? Well, again, career ownership. You don't need to take every job that comes your way. Again, right now, I've been out of work for 2 weeks. I know I could have taken a paycheck by now. I didn't. Because just taking a paycheck to take a paycheck is not a good long-term strategy for your career. It causes all sorts of problems if you're going to start job jumping. So you need to find a fit. If you go into one of these companies, there is a high likelihood at some point you will be laid off. That is games. Everybody knows it. If you don't want that, choose a different career path. And I'm not trying to say, you're not owed a career in games. Now, if you want that, there are inherent risks in it. But you also can get a career in games without going and working for Activision or EA. There are ways to go about that. So anyway, Devolver Digital says unionize. No other context. They say they don't post links to any any case studies that would point to this being a good solution for the games industry. They don't point to any other examples of disadvantages that might come into play. All they say is unionize because, once again, revenue layoffs equal unionize. It is the most short-sighted approach to trying to drive change in the industry, and that's why nothing continues to happen. Because there are no leaders. Everybody seems so tactical and short-sighted in the games industry, and even leaders at these fucking companies, that they don't have a larger strategy on how to remain relevant. Which is really the reason that they probably want to unionize in the first place. But the larger piece of it is, if you're better at strategy and remaining relevant, the less dependency you would have on a union-based structure, right? And again, I'm not taking one side or the other here. I'm just trying to point at the obvious, that everybody's always so quick to point just at a silver bullet without even having a larger conversation about the rest of the metrics, about the rest of the performance, about the business unit performance, about those that were laid off. None of that. Revenue, layoffs, unionize. It's so easy to complain. And this is, again, a larger, maybe get on my soapbox a little bit here again, but it's easy to complain. It's easy to point out shortcomings. The leaders identify pain points and shortcomings, and they solve them. And they don't solve them with revenue, layoffs, unionize. They solve them by saying, we've got a problem. I'll use the games industry as an example. We've got a problem in the games industry. There's mass layoffs every single year that impact huge amounts of people, that have far-reaching impacts on these people's ability to earn income, support their families, so on and so forth. That's not the way we want the industry to operate. So let's start taking a global look at how we solve this problem. Unionizing could be one of those options, but it's not binary. It's not unionize or don't unionize. There's a lot of other things that could go into creating a sustainable industry and a sustainable growth strategy that doesn't result in all of these layoffs. Now, yeah, we can point at leadership at Activision and say they're the bad guys. That was bad strategy. I could say that, but I don't know what the strategy was. Right? I could say that, but I don't know where the process fell down. What I do know is revenue layoffs don't equal unionize. It's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. It's an option. And if people want to go down that path, go down that path. But what I recommend is actually going down the path of unionizing, not not just going to Twitter and getting everybody all wild out on this fucking single bullet point word that might not even help. It might not help. And I cannot believe just the general lack of representation in the industry from anybody that shows any kind of business acumen from a performance standpoint. None of them. Nobody. So I wanted to get that side kind of conversation out there, some food for thought for people, because it just seems ridiculous to me that once again we go down a path. Everybody wants to be angry. They find something to be angry about. They latch onto a single word without even talking about the entire conversation, and they go immediately to a silver bullet solution in unionizing. So what I would offer to everybody is, before you jump to those conclusions and break out the old jump to conclusions mat and all of those blocks say unionize on it, I would challenge people to actually read the fucking stories, jump into the numbers a little bit, and instead of just complaining about it, offer up a solution or point to something that would support, your stance. Especially the leaders in the industry, including places like Devolver Digital putting out one-word statements that causes more chaos than it solves. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. Hopefully it was entertaining, and I should be back for a couple more of these here over the next week or so. And once again, thanks for listening for episode number 50, and I'll talk to you later. See ya.